Oh, hi! Today I want to know, are there monsters in Britain? I'm CrossJoe and welcome to A Wonderful Waste of Time. The answer is obviously yes, and most of them are politicians, but there are plenty of others, like this one, and this one, and this one. Where's Van Helsing when you need him? But today we'll be focusing on cryptids and folklore, the more mythical kinds of creatures that are rumoured to exist but are rarely seen or captured on film. Even though 99% of people are walking around with cameras in their pockets. So let's get the spooky vibe going with the British Cryptid Anthem, written and performed by yours truly, right now.
Loch Ness Monster is cool, Bigfoot is really cool, Mothman is cool.
Alright, that's enough of that. Now, it wouldn't make sense for me to do a list of British cryptids without starting with the one that everybody knows, that long-necked dinosaur type thing that lives in a loch in Scotland, not that far from Inverness. I feel like I should say, just in case, loch just means lake. There's a bunch of history for Nessie, but the part you're probably most aware of is the surgeon's photograph. Taken by Robert Kenneth Wilson, a gynaecologist from London, who'd swapped lady gardens for Scottish Highlands on a shooting and fishing trip with one of his buds. He just so happened to spot Nessie's head poking out of the water, and he took 4 photographs. 2 of them weren't exposed properly, and one of them was really blurry, leaving us with the one that was sold to the Daily Mail for £100, the equivalent of around £6,500 now, and becoming the most famous photo of any British cryptid. RKW didn't want his name attached to the picture. In fact, he seemed to distance himself from it, which is why it's now known as the surgeon's photograph. Skeptics said it was just some driftwood, maybe a bird, an otter, or even an elephant, which would still be super weird to find in a lake in Scotland. Personally, I think it just sort of looks like someone's arm sort of doing this. Like they're under the water with their arm poking out, and they're just sort of, wait, I can do this better.
Oh aye, look, it's me, the Loch Ness Monster. I'm just going for a swim. Hey, are you taking a picture of me, pal? I'll fucking chib you fucking chib. Some of us like our privacy, you know.
But there may be more to this story. Enter a man brilliantly named Marmaduke Wetherall. Marmaduke was an actor, writer, director and producer, but at the time he was working for the Daily Mail. He'd followed a story about footprints supposedly belonging to Nessie, which of course turned out to be a hoax. The Daily Mail then stopped funding his search for Nessie, leaving him humiliated. According to his son Ian's book about the photograph, Marmaduke plotted revenge by staging the photos, using a toy submarine with some modifications to make it a bit more necky. There was a small team of co-conspirators, including Marmaduke, his son Ian, his son-in-law and sculptor Christian Sperling, who modified the submarine, and an insurance agent called Maurice Chambers, who was the friend supposedly on the fishing trip with Robert Kenneth Wilson. This would make sense as to why Robbie Kenny Wilson didn't want his name attached to the photograph. He knew it was fake in the first place. But no one really knows Marmaduke's ultimate goal in doing this. If that money was split 5 ways between the team, it wouldn't have been worth a great deal. If it was to embarrass the Daily Mail, why did he never reveal it was a fake himself? Maybe he was just hoping he'd get more funding for further adventures in monster hunting. There's plenty more sightings of Nessie, but they all boil down to fake seals and otters. Maybe there really is or was something strange in Loch Ness, but there's definitely something special. Otters. It's otters. They're so fucking cute. Look at these little scamps. If you mess with them, they'll bite you, but at a distance, they're just river puppies. Good for them.
In 1577, during a raging thunderstorm in Bungay, Suffolk, a bolt of lightning struck St. Mary's Church, and in the chaos a creature appeared. A black hellhound with glowing red eyes ran through the church, attacking the congregation before disappearing. Then, 12 miles away, at the Holy Trinity Church in Blithborough, it appeared once again and attacked the congregation there too. This creature is known as Black Shuck, Old Shuck, or just Chuck to its friends. Most descriptions of the beast are pretty similar, but I think it was put best by this incredibly poetic man in some old footage from the BBC.
What a wonderful night it was. I always remember the moon was at its fullest. In fact, I'd never seen such a beautiful night. And as I was pushing the old bike, I heard these rattling of these chains. And I thought to myself, oh, well, that's nothing. That's just a matter of a horse straying off the marshes, and that kept coming nearer and nearer. And I thought to myself, well, I better stop here and let it pass. Well, as I got on the corner and I let it pass as I thought, and it was past me as a form as a great big black shaggy dog. So I said to the villagers the next night when I got there, the whole story, and they said, well, that's nothing. That's what they call Old Shuck. He roamed these roads pretty frequently.
Yes, the hellish, otherworldly appearance of a great big black shaggy dog could only be explained by the works of Satan himself. Or just like a really big dog.
The name Shuck comes from the Old English scucker, which means devil, and the first mention of devil dogs in Britain goes back to 1127 in what's known as the Wild Hunt. The Wild Hunt is a story in which a group of black-clad hunters on black horses and black he-goats, which is a way more fun term than billy goats, stalked through the forests between Stamford and Peterborough, accompanied by huge black dogs. Though this is just a version of the story, which goes back to old Scandinavian myths of Odin leading hunts accompanied by black hounds. And considering that a lot of Norse mythology was passed into Germanic mythology and came to England in the form of Anglo-Germanic mythology, as well as Norman Vikings invading Britain, it's very plausible that this is just an old story that's been passed down for generations with the locations changed just to keep it relevant. It's also worth noting that a lot of pre-Christian stories and folk tales were altered to be considered more sinister. Odin leading a hunt would have been noble and heroic to a Viking. Having a god pop round and bless you during the holy festival of Yule was definitely a positive thing. But retold through the lens of another religion where Odin is a false god, it can easily be made to sound sinister. There's a lot of stories of huge hounds and predatory pussycats found in the UK, and they're all a bit similar. Unlike Black Shuck Slow Gin, they're all incredibly fast, but much like the song Black Shuck by The Darkness, they're mostly heard during the darkness. And while it was pretty common for farmers to keep a great big black shaggy dog like an Irish wolfhound, busting into a church and attacking people seems a bit out of the ordinary. While this might just be a miscontextualised old tale, there are plenty of people that believe such a creature still exists today. So let's take a look at some of the internet's modern tales of Black Shuck.
I actually saw a black shuck in a graveyard at night. I went to a haunted church in the middle of nowhere with some friends at work. The site had been a place of worship for over 2,000 years. I was joking around, knocking on the church door, asking if anyone was there and just being a fool. I was in no way scared and do not believe in the supernatural. As we were walking around the boundary of the graveyard, I saw something red out of the corner of my eye. I turned around and saw it laying on all fours behind the hedge next to me. Once I realised I had seen it, it then stood up. It was massive, the size of a Great Dane at least.
Probably a fucking Great Dane then.
Huge glowing red eyes, very skinny with long black long fur and long tail. It was incredibly long.
Also, you're describing a Great Dane. It was the size of a Great Dane. It was a dog. And it had long fur and a tail. That's a Great Dane. You're describing a Great Dane.
The face was something between a wolf and a dog.
dog.
It was standing about 2 meters away from me. It made no noise when it moved, and there was no steam coming from its breath, unlike ours. I in no way believe in the supernatural.
I've said for the second time. We've clarified you don't believe in the supernatural.
I in no way believe in the supernatural. I am a very rational person and have lived in the countryside all my life. I've had a shotgun license since I was 18 and been shooting air rifles since I was 8. I've been shooting at night hundreds of times and have seen every animal the English countryside has to offer. I would have thought I was very qualified to identify any animal. I have never seen anything even remotely similar to what I saw that night. It was an amazing experience.
This whole thing is just person sees dog and then there's like... It was dog. He was dog-like. He had a dog's face and a dog's body with dog's feet and a dog's tail. It had breath like that of a dog and it looked rather like a dog. I saw 3 what I can only describe as hellhounds in Sheringham near Golf Course, seafront area. This was around 11 at night. I was 17 and I was with 3 friends. We turned the corner from an alley and just stopped. At the time, 2 things confused us: the size of the dogs and the mist which seemed to be just on that road. One dog looked up at us and we just ran. We ran mainly because there were 3 abnormally huge dogs in the middle of the road. I like that they felt the need to qualify why they ran. They set it up that there's 3 hellhounds. And they're like, we ran because there were 3 hellhounds. Nobody was going to think there was a separate reason. There were 3 hellhounds and that was fine, but one of them had a knife. Didn't think about shock at all at the time. I always assumed it was a single dog / myth. The dogs were about 10 meters away and they were the size of a small pony. The size of a small pony is the size of a large dog.
I have seen a black dog and some other creatures, but they said and did nothing, just watched me, and I greeted them respectfully. It was while I was looking for a church.
I've seen a black dog and some other creatures. Again, it's a dog. What you've seen is a dog. They can't even even in the comments where they're making outrageous claims, no one is capable of describing it in any way other than it was a dog. It's not supernatural if it's just a dog. Alright, I want to see what people commented on this one. Yeah, that one will do. I seen one here in the USA, at least that's what I believe it was. Around 500 pounds, glowing red eyes. It was as real as me or you. It was in the road and we passed right by. It was just sitting there in the road and only... It was in the road and it passed right by us and it was there in the road. Around 500 pounds, glowing red eyes. It was as real as you and me, and it was in the road. We passed right by. It was just sitting there in the road, and the only thing it did was turn his head, looking at us with those glow red eyes as we passed by. I've never, ever been writing something and been like, I need to write this with the urgency as if it was happening to me now. Is this happening to them as they're writing it? I see one in the USA 5 minutes ago. I better go on YouTube and reply to someone else's comment with this story in all caps with no comments. A few people there who don't believe in punctuation, but what they do believe in is great big black shaggy dogs.
Brownies. More Scottish folklore that spread to the rest of the UK in the form of a household spirit known as a brownie, which aren't chocolate and probably aren't delicious at all. And now I want brownies. These small creatures appear in the night and perform household tasks and do farm work in exchange for milk, cream, cake, or some other kind of food that they like. I wonder how they feel about brownies. They were said to be very fond of animals and would happily work on a farm where they could tend to the animals or become friends with household pets. But be warned, if you insult a brownie or take advantage of its kind nature, it may leave and you'll have to do all your work on your own. You lazy bastard. 2 great ways to piss off a brownie include offering them clothes and trying to baptize them, because they don't need your charity and they just don't like really fuck with religion, you know? Traditionally, brownies are considered to be independent. They'll help you out and live with you, but they won't take clothes or be involved in religious practices because they don't want to become tied with you or your community. Unlike house elves, brownies are free to do what they want. They're not owned by you or the house. They're free. So as long as you keep them fed, don't try to spy on them, and make sure the house isn't a total mess, they're essentially a pretty good roommate. Brownies were also considered a little tricky. While they would clean up the stuff that was out of place, some would supposedly mess up the tidy things. Or maybe they just had a different idea of where things should go. They're also said to play pranks, especially in wealthy houses with servants. The brownies would pick on the laziest servant and make them work. There's also the story of a brownie who had a habit of stealing keys, so the family gathered around the hearth with a piece of cake for the brownie. They then closed their eyes and waited, at which point the keys would be thrown back at them, and the brownie would take its cake offering. Who wouldn't swap keys for a key lime pie?
But what exactly is a brownie? Are they goblins or sprites, maybe elves? Some consider them fairies, but they're generally considered to be their own thing entirely. While modern stories describe them as small, in a lot of older stories they're the size of an average human. Most of them were considered male, though not exclusively, and there was a mostly female equivalent called silkies, who were known for wearing grey silk. It could just be a story to explain people squatting on farms and maybe helping out in exchange for food, but the description of them having brown skin alongside the name brownies, them not wanting to be converted to the local religion, and their supposed willingness to serve. There was definitely a point in researching this where I felt like I was going to stumble across something that made it obvious that this was just slavery being dressed up as something cute and quirky. I didn't find anything that made it definitive, but it still feels a little... it's not good. Brownies are very similar to house elves, who are basically considered to be slaves, described as needing to serve as if it makes them happy to work and be owned, which is also the way that some particularly fucked up pro-slavery people felt in the 1800s when this folklore was more popular. There was even an American physician called Samuel A. Cartwright who claimed that African slaves wanting to be free was a form of mental illness that he called drapetomania. He also claimed that it came from slave owners making themselves too familiar with slaves and treating them as equals. Bet you didn't think an episode about cryptids was going to get this rough, did you? He literally said that giving them too much food, giving them clothes and spending time with them were bad, and that giving them more than they needed to survive created the risk of them trying to escape. All things that match up a little too well with brownie folklore. And while this doctor was largely laughed at by less diabolical people, it's hard to imagine there weren't other people who thought the same way. Not only in the southern states of the US, where Dr. Cartwright tried to push this idea, but in other places like the UK. And some of those people were probably willing to tell tales to convince others of their way of thinking, or maybe even to explain to children why what they were doing was, in their eyes, fine. To add further weirdness to these characters, they may have actually been made real. There's a weird tradition amongst a few rich people. Rich people doing absurd, stupid shit? Well, I never! Roman Emperor Hadrian had a huge garden in his villa that was maintained by live-in hermits. Something which caught on again in Georgian England, where some rich people who owned estates hired ornamental hermits. Essentially paying people to live in a small unheated outbuilding, never washing themselves and wearing rags. They weren't allowed to speak to people, they grew long beards and long fingernails, and they spent all of their time tidying the garden. They were basically hireable brownies and just a weird spectacle for bored rich people to gawk at. To go in the opposite direction to this concept, the nice and fun perception of brownies led to some good children's stories and poems. In the UK, a faction of the Girl Guides, or Girl Scouts if you're American, were renamed from rosebuds to brownies in 1915 and are still called that today. The group is also spread internationally and can be found in Ireland, Canada, Australia, the US, Hong Kong and Singapore. The name change was based on a story by Juliana Horatia Ewing with the idea that the girls would learn to be helpful like brownies rather than lazy like bogarts, their destructive and malevolent counterparts. Which I guess, now that I'm thinking about it, means that they're using the folklore of brownies to convince little girls to be subservient and grateful for housework? I'm not sure that there's a version of the brownie story that doesn't end with something kind of manipulative and awful.
Redcaps. Redcaps are one of my favourite pieces of folklore. Their story is dark and intriguing, and their influence on popular culture may be rather odd. Redcaps are strange, vicious little creatures, or perhaps a singular creature that stalks the border between England and Scotland. They're said to live in castle ruins and are drawn to places where great acts of tyranny were committed. Some stories describe them as goblins or dwarves, but mostly depict them as being rather human. Other stories say that it's just one singular creature that moves around the border. Whichever version it is, redcaps are said to prey on travellers who enter the castle ruins, brutally murdering them and soaking its hat in their blood to keep it red. In fact, it's said that if a redcap doesn't keep its hat crimson red, it'll wither and die, meaning it regularly has to kill people. It's said to look like a short old man with a long white beard, with long, sharp teeth, glowing red eyes, and talons like an eagle. It wears iron boots and carries a pike, which is one of those sort of long, short axes, like a spear, pot, hatchet. Redcaps are also incredibly fast and resilient. Trying to outrun them is impossible, and attacking them seems to do nothing. In their essence, redcaps are just small, violent serial killers who wear a really gross hat.
It's likely just a warning tale to convince people not to crash in old buildings that were destroyed in the conflict between England and Scotland, or misconstrued murders committed by bandits and border reivers who'd attack travellers and local farms to steal from them, though they could also be stories made to scare those raiders away. But it could easily be based on an actual transient serial killer who lived there and just killed off anyone who got too close. The description of a short old man isn't exactly otherworldly when you ditch the cliched sharp teeth and glowing red eyes that could easily be tacked on by scared locals or retellings of the story. The other thing that I think is really interesting is that the redcap's hat is always depicted as being kind of pointy. It varies greatly from being a skull cap that peaks a little bit around the crown to being a really big pointy hat. It's also worth noting that dwarves are the inspiration for gnomes, as in garden gnomes, those little guys that are always fishing or sleeping against a big mushroom, and mostly depicted as wearing a bright red fucking hat. Garden gnomes, and gnomes in general, are mostly based on Scandinavian creatures like Tomta and Nissa, who look pretty similar. Plus, if you consider the influence of Scandinavian settlers in Scotland and the northernmost part of England, i.e. the border, it might explain why those supposedly cute garden gnomes in their bright red hats seem kinda sinister. And why the plot of the movie Sherlock Gnomes should have been dark and brutal, with the redcap serially killing off all the other gnomes, and then Sherlock Gnomes and whatever Watson's called has got a gnome pun in it. They have to solve like actual murders in which all the other gnomes have been brutally killed, and so they haven't got blood. Oh shit, it wouldn't work.
In the fens in Lincolnshire, there were two kinds of tiddies, the tiddy mun and the tiddy people. The Titty People were fairy-type creatures who helped crops grow and opened the flowers in spring. People would leave them offerings from the first harvest of the year, and they could supposedly be found sitting by the fireplace or dancing on flat stones. The Tiddy Mun was a singular creature considered to control the wetlands, who either prevented or caused flooding. He was described as a little old man with a long white beard, much like most dwarves and gnomes. His laugh sounded like the song of local birds like the peewit, and some considered him king of the titties.
That's it. They're just basically a regional version of the same little creatures that are supposed to help you out that most countries have a version of. I just put this one in because I thought it was funny. They're called titties. And there's a bunch of little titties, and then there's one big old wet titty. The word titty probably just means little, like tiddly, or it could come from an old word that means tide. But forget all that, because this section was about one thing. Titties. So you may have heard of Mongolian deathworms, but I can assure you that Mongolian people aren't the only ones with a mean case of worms. This last one's the longest story, as it's more of a complete tale rather than a conceptual creature, but I think it's a genuinely interesting one, and it's presented as if it happened.
In County Durham, the young heir of the Lambton estate, John Lambton, was like kind of a rebel, you know, like he just kind of did his own thing. John decided he wanted to go fishing, so he grabbed his fishing rod, his fishing net, maybe a fishing hat, and the guy straight up fished. Except there was one problem. It was Sunday, and that's God's day, not fish day. Even though a mysterious old man warned him that no good could come from skipping church. A place where that old man couldn't have been if he was out laying down rules for strangers. But John just wanted to fish. He spent a while fishing but didn't have a single bite until the church service was over. Then he felt a pull on his rod, grabbed it tight and reeled one in. Out from the river, John pulled a small serpent, its head like a salamander but with 9 holes down either side of its skull, and a body like a snake or an eel. The old man returned just in time to see what he'd caught. Clearly having bolted the second that church was over, as it's implied that John caught this the second the service ended. And that's when John declared he'd caught the devil. The old man, still being a real judgy Justin, told John not to release the creature back into the river. So John instead threw it down a well, where some other poor bastard would probably scoop it up while trying to get drinking water. But John didn't care about people. John cared about fishing. John then moved on with his life and forgot all about the freaky shit that he'd caught, doing less rod fishing and more sword swishing as he joined the Crusades. While John was busy fighting in a holy war instead of fishing, the unholy whole-headed fish that he'd fished had finished growing to an unholy size in the hole that he'd left it in when he finished fishing. The serpent had grown into a colossal dragon-like creature, which poisoned the water in the well before leaving to find a new home. The creature wrapped itself around a hill near the river it was fished out of, and lived on a diet of local livestock and the occasional small child. While attacking the Lambton estate, John's father managed to calm the beast's daily tirades by providing it with the fresh milk of 9 cows.
No, milky moos, made with the fresh milk of 9 cows, and that's a milky moo promise.
Many villagers and knights try to slay the beast, but are instead squeezed to death in its long, wormy body. Worse still, even if they managed to damage the creature, it would just reattach lost parts and heal itself. When John returned to find his family's estate in ruins thanks to the creature, he vowed to destroy it. And what better and more Christian way to destroy a creature than with the help of a witch? Just to reiterate, he caught a devilfish because he skipped church. He then fought on the Christian side of a holy war, and now he's going to team up with a witch. The witch then immediately throws this all back in his face, telling John that this is because of his actions as a child, having chosen fishing over noted fisherman Jesus. The witch then suggests that John visits a blacksmith to have his armour covered in sharp points, so that even when he's captured by the worm, it'll be cut to pieces when it tries to squeeze him to death. And then, having given him absolutely no magical aid whatsoever, tells him that if he's successful, he must kill the next living thing that he sees, or be cursed for 9 generations. John arranges for one of the family's hunting hounds to be summoned when he blows his bugle, so that he may sacrifice the dog and break the curse. John sets out to fight the creature near the river. His plan to stop him being constricted to death works, and parts of the creature are chopped off as it tries to crush John to death. The pieces then fall into the river and are washed away before the worm can reattach them. John is victorious. He blows his bugle in preparation to perform the final step, but John's father forgets the signal and runs over to celebrate with his son, which is bad for John, but pretty good for the dog. Knowing that the only way to break the curse was to kill his father, John lays down his weapons and accepts the curse on his family for 9 generations. But not the dog. The dog was fine.
This one doesn't really need a lot of explaining. It's a pretty cut and dry Christian moral story designed to convince children to go to church, instead of all that darn fishing you kids are into. Though it could be based in reality, considering that most English descriptions of dragons, known as worms with a Y, are often large scaly beasts with no legs, no wings and poison breath instead of fire, which sounds like a really dramatic way of describing a snake. I still think this story is kind of cool, but it does showcase why I'm not always super keen on Christian moral stories. Folklore tends to be more like, the spirit of the first settlers who lived here are protecting the land, or this was the site of a grand immoral battle that caused unnecessary bloodshed, and now a malevolent spirit punishes the wicked who come here. And Christian stories tend to be more like, he missed church once and now demons are gonna murder everyone. And in the famous words of YouTube commenter Robolub on a video about this story, I think it's better to be fishing thinking about God than sitting in church thinking about fishing. I guess I might also be biased because I'm not religious, but I'm not really scared of devil worms, which is good considering I've never really been to any form of church, so I'd have about 1,000 fucking dragons to deal with. But I think I could take them, because I may not have been to church, but I've also never been fishing.
Heading back into the unknown.
Well, now you know why brownies aren't always delicious, why fishing is a sin, and why you should always be careful when approached by a great big black shaggy dog. Further research for this episode includes the game Made of Skur, which is based on a Welsh ghost story and sounds pretty cool.
Fucking hell, it's only a bloody ghost, isn't it?
If you're interested in more about brownies, gnomes and Tomta, check out episode 66 of the Chilluminati podcast featuring Dodger. And finally, please check out that BBC clip with the overly poetic man. The rest of the video is pretty interesting, but that man is truly special. Hey, thanks for watching. If you like this video, please like this video, and if you want to see more, you should subscribe. If you have a question I should answer, let me know in the comments, and if there's someone you know who you think would like this video, then why not send them a link. Bye.